Chapter 7, Loud America. Beneath the nearly invincible and despairing noise, the sound of many tongues all struggling for dominance. James Baldwin, No Name in the Street. The other day I was driving down the main drag of Lyndonville, Vermont, near my home. A large, sleek pickup truck with what appeared to be a middle-aged man at the wheel roared out of a side street and cut in front of me. I caught only the quickest glimpse of him before he became invisible behind a window-sized decal of the American flag. Blazoned in large black letters along its stripes were the words, "Drive 'em like you stole 'em." Why a man this old and well off, it was no cheap truck, wanted to drive like a car thief, or why he imagined this was how any competent car thief would drive, or why even a thief would want to drive a pickup truck if he had nothing to pick up with it. This one was as shiny and unused as a ceremonial sword. Intriguing as these questions are, did not interest me so much as what the motto had to do with the flag. Presumably there was some connection between the two, and presumably we could all be counted on to see it. Though I wonder if as recently as 50 years ago, the average American would have seen much of anything except possibly a case of flag desecration. I suspect even Jesse James would have scratched his head for a minute over this one. Yet if, as our ads and leaders keep telling us, America means exceeding the limits, cranking it up, letting her rip, galloping through the chicken yards of the world with feathers flying and guns ablazing, then the connection is more obvious than I'm making it sound. You, quote, drive it like you stole it, end quote, because if you're a true-born American and want something bad enough, you will steal it, and have stolen it, from the Indians back in the day, from your great-grandchildren in the sweltering bankrupt days to come. Parse it any way you want. To, quote, drive 'em like you stole 'em, end quote, you have to make some noise. You have to be willing to stick your prerogatives in somebody else's ears or face, as the driver was doing with his customized flag, which seemed to stand for nothing so much as his middle finger. Welcome to Loud America. In Sturgis, South Dakota, home of the world's largest motorcycle rally, sits the Loud American Roadhouse. Like the truck that cut me off, the name of the bar got me thinking about what American has come to mean in our time and whether loud ought to be included with free and brave in our national anthem. There are reasons for thinking that it should. The fact that the United States has more cars on the road and planes in the sky than any other country, and the fact that we have been in no fewer than 14 major military engagements since the Second World War, even the less spectacular fact that, quote, America's biggest exports are television programs and movies, end quote, our rock concerts, professional sports events, political conventions, and mega church services, increasingly indistinguishable from one another, and getting louder all the time, serve as models for the civilized world. That adds up to a lot of noise. So this is taken from a book called The Unwanted Noise of Everything We Want, a book about noise by Garret Keizer. And this was published in 2010. Interesting book. And, you know, some of it discusses noise in a way that you and I might think in terms of, say, noise pollution and that kind of thing. But he also goes into noise throughout history, and then, as we read, a little bit of political commentary of, you know, what does noise represent, say, politically? What does noise represent in terms of a certain kind of worldview? And what I enjoyed about the book and what I like about, or what I wanted to do with this little series, in general, was to, get us to read, and then put what we read, into a conversation with our deen and our perspectives as Muslims. So, what do we do with a culture that seems to increasingly prize noise? Now, he gives a little bit of a caricature in that section of a, presumably white, southern, for lack of a better word, redneck, that takes that kind of braggadocious approach to noise and attaches it again, to being a real American. And, while it can certainly be a bit of a tongue-in-cheek, but there is certainly a level of truth to it. However, we should not be fooled into thinking that that is only something of Southern white culture, and that indeed it has become just a part of American culture as a whole. We do live in a time increasingly in which noise is just a part of our culture. And it's something that we see coming from both the left and the right, the Republican, the Democrat, the conservative, the liberal, right? And so what does that mean for us? What does that mean for us as Muslims, given the fact that we undoubtedly have a very important aspect in our religious, spiritual way of life that greatly prizes quietness, quietude, quiet reflection, that it greatly prizes humility, because along with this noise and drive it like you stole it, even if it is somewhat tongue-in-cheek, it is embracing a kind of immorality, right? So noise and immorality, that confluence, those two things coming together. So what will that mean for us? And I'm sure for myself, there is a little bit of me as an American that undoubtedly has that braggart in him, which is something obviously has to be tamed, maybe not done away with, right? But tamed, and therefore on the other flip side, that we can definitely say that being brash and loud and noisy is something not beloved by Allah, and yet there are certain characteristics also associated with being loud that can be standing up for oneself, being brave, being courageous. Not that you need to do so all the time. Of course, in Surah Al-Luqman, Allah lets us, the most decrying sound is the sound of the braying donkey. And that Luqman alayhi salam tells his son, don't walk upon the earth, don't thump around and walk around on the earth, right? Walk softly and humbly upon the earth. So what would that mean for us, right? So, as an American Muslim, there's a part of me that will have to tame, that aspect of myself and those cultural notions, because we do have many aspects of them that we valorize, particularly for manhood, but even just, in Americanhood, right, that greatly prizes that. And for a nation that, for at least a lot of its history, has also, in God we trust, and God bless America, and this and this and that and that, where is the idea of really getting to know God versus you defining God? And of course, the Quran warns us about, وَأَلْفَيْنَا عَلَيْهِ آبَائِنَا, right? That we just simply found our forefathers doing this, right? So people make up their own traditions. And of course, the three things that the Quran warns us about in terms of shaitan being our enemy is he will what? يَأْمُرُكُمْ, right? إِنَّمَا يَأْمُرُكُمْ بِالسُّوءِ وَالْفَحْشَاءِ وَأَنْ يَقُولُ عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, right? And that, there's three basic things that shaitan will try to command us to do. The first is to just do things that are evil. The second is to do things that are obscene. And the third is to say things about Allah of which we have no knowledge of. And in a noisy environment, it's easy to perhaps be tricked and fooled and pulled into that. So, something for us to really consider when, when we think about living in a noisy environment. And so, if we can clearly, just for the sake of summary, we can certainly discern that noise is bad, even if it isn't always easy to define what is noise. But we can certainly say, it's like, we know it when we see it, or we know it when we hear it. What are we going to do then to make a life for ourselves that perhaps is a little bit less noisy? Retreating from the world, right? And again, that's one thing that, in the kind of braggadocious spirit of American exceptionalism, there's no room for what we might call khalwa, or retreating from the world, right? Of, like what in our tradition of, i'tikaf, right? You withdraw from the world and you dedicate oneself, even if just for a short period of time, to worship of God and reflecting on Allah and so on. That's very hard to do in a world that is enshrouded, in noise. So anyway, you may enjoy reading this book. It's called The Unwanted Sound of Everything We Want, a book about noise by Garret Keizer, published in 2010. So I'm going to try to continue this little series of just pulling some books off the shelf, giving some short reflections, and encouraging you guys to read. First and foremost, read the Book of Allah, but definitely read and become familiar with the, if we're not also familiar with the literature that's being produced in the civilization and society in which we live, that's just not a good move. So anyway, I hope this will maybe encourage a little bit of love of reading, encourage you to get out some books and read, and may Allah Ta'ala put benefit in it for us. والصلوات والسلام على نبيه الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.